I made something for you.
Ooh.
So I make papyri facsimiles. Oh, my description is a little bit wonky here. Fix that. So you were talking about like what is our oldest manuscript evidence? So this guy is P52. John Ryland's 457. So that's a genuine Egyptian papyri that I made. I cut it out for you, and then I transcribed the text on that manuscript.
The discovery that's leaving the world speechless. Scientists in Israel uncovered a 2,000-year-old scroll in a cave, an ancient letter said to be written by Jesus himself. Not a parable, not a sermon, but a deeply personal message to his brother, James. And when the story hit the Joe Rogan Experience, the reaction was pure disbelief. Could this letter change everything we didn't know about history, faith, and the man behind one of the world's largest religions? In this video, we'll break down the jaw-dropping find, the message it contains, the fierce debate it sparked, and what Joe Rogan had to say. Get ready for a mystery that waited 2 millennia to be heard. Galilee's caves tell stories. In recent decades, what began as routine archaeological surveys have continued to shed light on ancient life in the Galilee region. Teams from the Israeli Antiquities Authority have explored networks of caves near Mount Arbel, a rugged, wind-swept area overlooking the Sea of Galilee. These caves, known for their use as hideouts during times of conflict and as shelters over the centuries, have yielded artifacts that help scholars piece together the region's rich and complex history. Each survey brings the potential for discoveries that connect the past with the present. Hidden behind layers of collapsed rock, archaeologists have recovered items such as pottery shards, coins, and fragments of parchment or papyrus that hint at the daily lives and beliefs of the people who once sought refuge in these caves. The arid climate and protected environment of the caves have preserved many objects in remarkable condition, allowing researchers to study materials rarely found intact elsewhere. Finds in the region have included fragments in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, representing the diverse cultural and linguistic landscape of ancient Judea. Unlike manuscripts left to succumb to the elements, material taken from the caves is often well preserved, owing either to natural sealing by rockfalls or sedimentations. Once these objects are removed from the cave in a carefully controlled manner and brought to conservation laboratories, it may take months of painstaking work to finally get them into a stable condition. Techniques for the stabilization of unstable parchment or ink enable scholars to extract information about the texts, the scribes who wrote them, and the communities that held them dear. Such finds may, in fact, provide new insights into both quotidian life and spiritual practices in that region. The languages in which these texts were written are also quite informative. Most of the ancient documents provided from the caves are in the Aramaic language of Judea during the 1st century. This hints that some of the material was meant to be read locally rather than by a wider public. Others show signs of being Greek or Hebrew, telling us of those days of cultural interaction. Legal documents, biblical texts, and sectarian writings are likewise part of that spectrum, weaving together to form an increasingly sharper picture of a more diverse period. Most of these discoveries were personal correspondence, legal documents, and sacred manuscripts, as the well-known Dead Sea Scrolls contained biblical and sectarian writings whose intended audience could be a select few rather than made public proclamation. This invites contemplation on the care with which such sacred texts were preserved by ancient people. The endurance of such copious numbers of materials is a testament to any protection made on the part of individuals hiding them, whether against enemy onslaught or mere revenge of time. The erudite among facts have comprehended that with each discovery, one piece is added to the puzzle of ancient history. No singular artifact will likely overturn a whole concept of history, but every fragment offers an opportunity for clarity into what all may have been known. Such finds, according to Dr. Oren Gutfeld, an archaeologist working cave excavations with similar finds, help us better understand the daily lives and their spiritual world of people who lived here thousands of years ago. Such work continues to show the timeless association between landscape and the layers of history that it holds. Yet sometimes, the most astonishing finds come not from caves, but from forgotten corners of a library. Ancient text of young Jesus. A groundbreaking discovery at the Hamburg State and University Library has revealed what is now believed to be the oldest surviving fragment of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. The small papyrus fragment, measuring about 4 by 2 inches, dates to the 4th or 5th century CE, making it several centuries older than previously known copies of this text. This apocryphal gospel focuses on stories about Jesus' childhood, filling in details not found in the canonical New Testament. The fragment was identified by Dr. Lajos Berkes of Humboldt University of Berlin and Professor Gabriel Noki Macedo of the University of Liège. This excerpt from the story is about Jesus when he was 5 years old. He shapes 12 clay sparrows and breathes into them so that they come alive and fly away. This scene is not found in the Bible, though present in Christian apocrypha. It looked like part of an everyday document, like a private letter or a shopping list, because the handwriting seems so clumsy, said Dr. Berkes, but a closer analysis of content and linguistic features unmasked its actual weight. Lines from the Infancy Gospel of Thomas are also around 600 years prior to the previously known versions. However, what further makes the discovery interesting is the context of how the finding was received. The handwriting was unpracticed and suggested copying by a student or activity outside of formal liturgy. The handwriting is not elegant, and the scribe evidently had not received a high level of education. But the text shows careful copying of the words of the gospel, conclude Berkes and Macedo. This, of course, confirms that the story of the childhood of Jesus was actually widely known among various social and educational classes in late antiquity. This discovery opened a window into early Christian literature, which has thrived on its own. Although the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was not accepted into the biblical canon and was considered apocryphal or even heretical by early church authorities, its continued copying shows the appeal these stories held for Christian communities. We believe that the fragment comes from Egypt, where the text was widely read in Coptic as well as in Greek, Berkes explained. The find illustrates how narratives about Jesus' early years captured the imaginations of believers across the centuries. This ancient papyrus adds a valuable piece to the puzzle of early Christian storytelling. It doesn't really disprove much, but it certainly further enriches how followers of Jesus might have related to his life beyond what is recorded in the canonical Gospels. The fact that the fragment survives provides a rare opportunity for scholars to study how these traditions were transmitted and transformed. As Berkes and Macedo continue their analysis, their forthcoming critical edition will further illuminate the role of apocryphal literature in the development of Christian thought and culture. Sometimes, what these ancient fragments hint at is even more surprising than the find itself. Echoes of Christian origins. A newly identified ancient papyrus fragment has captivated scholars and the public alike, offering fresh insight into early Christian writings about Jesus' childhood. The fragment, housed for years in the archives of Hamburg State and University Library, dates to the 4th or 5th century CE and is now recognized as the oldest known manuscript of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. This non-canonical gospel contains stories absent from the Bible, describing miraculous events from Jesus' youth that were widely shared among early Christian communities. The most striking thing about this fragment is the subject matter itself. The segment preserves some of the ever-famous episode in which a young Jesus fashions sparrows from clay and brings them to life by his miracles. This story, although completely outside the New Testament, nevertheless does reflect the human drive to imagine the formative years of a figure central to Christian faith. So stated Dr. Lajos Berkes, who helped in identifying the manuscript. He also noted that the manuscript had been overlooked for too long on account of its informal handwriting, leading many earlier catalogers to believe that it was an everyday document, another letter, or even a list. The fragment's modest hand suggests that it might have been copied either by a student or by a novice scribe, perhaps in a school or monastic setting. This fact provides a major clue as to the character of use of such stories, not as official liturgy, but as material for teaching, copying practice, or a moral reflection. It emphasizes the way apocryphal literature has been shaping Christian thought beyond formal church doctrine, as if offering the impression that early believers had more stories to teach than just those of the canon. This is what makes it especially significant with regard to an understanding of early Christian diversity. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas was read outside the canon of the Bible and rejected by the authorities of the early church. But the circulation and preservation of that fragment show that it could mean alternatives for a certain number of believers in the life and deeds of Jesus. The fragment itself, probably from Egypt, shows that stories were read and copied across languages and regions in both Greek and Coptic communities, challenging modern presumptions about how ancient Christian communities dealt with scripture and storytelling. The fragment could deepen historical knowledge. It reminds us of the gradual process of defining orthodoxy and that believers relied on many texts for centuries. This little piece of papyrus takes us closer to the fact that stories created to fill the gaps left by the canonical Gospels had a wide and, in fact, strikingly persistent appeal. The finding does not modify core historical understandings of Jesus, but it adds some valuable context to the early Christian literary context. Traditions about Jesus' childhood stirred the imagination to understand more fully how the figure of Jesus was construed in antiquity. As further investigation of the fragment unfolds, it promises an eventually brighter light on transmission and the role played by apocryphal texts in the ancient world. Joe Rogan's raw reaction. When news of ancient texts and discoveries enters public discussion, it often finds its way onto the Joe Rogan Experience, where historical and religious topics have long sparked thoughtful conversations. In January 2025, Joe Rogan, who has described himself in the past as a former atheist, was visibly amazed during an episode featuring biblical scholar Wesley Huff. Huff presented Rogan with a replica of Papyrus 52, considered the oldest surviving fragment of the Gospel of John. Coupled with the trial of Jesus under Pontius Pilate, the artifact has texts thought to date back as early as the 1st or 2nd century AD. As he took in the replica, Rogan said, truly astonished, "Wow, that's unbelievable. Wow, that's so fascinating." At this time, Huff divulged the documentary value of Papyrus 52, which even researchers regard as one of the most excellent testimonies to show that the Gospel of John circulated earlier than previously thought. Found in Egypt, the papyrus, interestingly, has writings on both sides, something historians would refer to as early Christian manuscripts. The reason is that other people did not use both sides of a writing surface. They had scrolls. Hughes cites Jesus' words on the front of the replica, while Pilate's accusation reads on the reverse. What is truth? Huff described creating the much sought-after replica himself, cutting the papyrus, and transcribing by hand the ancient text. Rogan replied, "You did a great job, dude. You nerded out." The discussion did not just end at the relic. Huff highlighted other historical testimonies relating to early Christianity, such as the Alexamenos graffito, an ancient Roman ecclesiastical graffiti ridiculing a Christian worshipper by caricaturing the intent with which it was made. The graffiti, belonging certainly to the period between 50 and 250 AD, features a person worshipping a donkey-headed Zlin man on a cross. According to Huff, it would probably be the earliest known view of crucifixion, the evinced type of ridicule of early Christians from the society around them. Rogan was struck by how brutal those times were, and yet how durable the communities remained in the face of such opposition being hurled against them. The dialogue between Rogan and Huff downplays the condition of some early Christian heroes. "Who was it who got crucified upside down?" Rogan asked. Huff said it was the Apostle Peter, who was reputed to have died under Emperor Nero. The crucifixion of Peter was requested in tradition upside down, it being said that he did not feel worthy to die in the same way as the Lord Jesus. This detail led Rogan to comment on the nasty history of crimes and punishment among the Romans, while Huff noted how all of this fed into the narratives and traditions afterward. The podcast featured scholarly investigations into Jesus' death, including a study published in 1986 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Alongside Huff and others, he confirmed the conclusion of the study. Jesus appears to have died from exsanguination, exhaustion, asphyxia, suffocation, and maybe heart failure. This medical account, Huff argues, fits well with ancient sources and gives a good layout of the physical realities of crucifixion. The overall theme showed Rogan's willingness to consider evidence from faith and from science. In the end, the resurrection was discussed in relation to ancient responses. Rogan asked if there were records of groups denying the resurrection in ancient times. Huff explained that, while denials arose from later movements, such as some Gnostic groups, these denials were molded by philosophical ideas that regarded the spiritual as good and the physical as evil. The exchange exemplified Rogan's process of inquiry, a starting point of curiosity tempered by critical thought, engaging seriously and respectfully with difficult issues that intersect history, faith, and scholarship. As the conversation stirred curiosity, so too did the wider world begin to question what such a discovery truly meant: hidden, forgotten, or faked. No discovery of this magnitude escapes without fierce debate, and the alleged 2,000-year-old letter from Jesus is no exception. Almost as soon as the translation hit scholarly circles and media outlets, arguments erupted. Is the letter a lost treasure of early Christianity, a forgery designed to deceive, or something deliberately hidden from the world for reasons we'll never fully understand? The lines between these theories blur, but each tells us something about how we view the past and how much we trust it. Let's start with the theory that's captivated the hopeful. The idea was that the letter was deliberately hidden, sealed in wax, wrapped in cloth, and buried deep in a cave not far from Mount Arbel. Supporters of this theory point to the method of preservation. This wasn't some scrap tossed aside. It was carefully stored, as if someone wanted it untouched. Historians who lean this way suggest that perhaps Jesus, knowing what lay ahead, chose to leave behind a private message for James, one too intimate, too personal for public eyes. They point to lines in the letter like, "What I could not speak, I leave with you in silence," as evidence that this was meant to be a private farewell. And if so, they ask, was the scroll hidden because it was too sacred, too dangerous, or simply too tender for the world to see? Then there appears the fading remnant theory. That is, it was not hidden, but lost. Many scrolls and letters disappeared in an age of persecution, chaos, and shifting sands of power. Most probably, the letter was placed in a cave for safekeeping when a flight from danger was undertaken. Maybe it was to be retrieved later by James or any other such disciple, but the return never was. Through the centuries, ownership of lands changed, wars were fought, and the scroll's existence became faint in the dust of time. They who believe this theory say that this letter is not evidence of secrecy, but because of a historical accident, a survivor of time's relentless rush, and in that survival lies its mystery. What else, forgotten under stone and sand, is waiting? There lies the most acerbic of theories: forgery. Critics, especially more skeptical of extravagant claims, argue that the scroll might be a forgery, very well executed. After all, forgery was not foreign to the ancient world and isn't now. Could someone have made something like this to motivate faith or cast doubt, or simply to receive fame? Skeptics would add that the materials, although at the correct period according to carbon dating, do not prove authorship. Conceivably, an early Christian or a later scribe might have written the letter and buried it to lend it false weight. Even a hoax could have been modern using authentic ancient materials, rare but not impossible. They say that people are so easily bought into this kind of discovery, and how our thirst for mystery can blind us from seeing that unmistakable red flag. No single camp, however, has all the answers to this question. The evidence of preservation may therefore seem unusually meticulous, but why could it not be said of any document extremely dear to someone? This letter really does convey a certain rawness of emotion, but does that alone speak toward anything but an extraordinary canvas of the writer's ability? The carbon dating of the parchment and ink does correlate to the 1st century, but scientific tests alone cannot tell us who's had the quill. One may even ask why it matters, whether it was hidden away, or lost, faked. Why indeed? What is it about hearing a word of comfort from some quiet, personal message from Jesus that throws us more than an entire library filled with sermons and scriptures? Perhaps it is because that alternately real or fabricated letter speaks to something we see so rarely, a glimmer beyond the myth, human, hurting somehow, and reaching out to family rather than followers. A voice for our time? Sometimes history reveals itself not when we expect it, but when we need it most. And for many, that's what makes the discovery of ancient writings, whether well-known or newly unearthed, feel so powerful. Whether genuine, forgotten, or misinterpreted, such texts often echo into a world that feels lost, divided, and searching for wisdom. It's no surprise that new interest in early Christian manuscripts is stirring hearts and minds far beyond the circles of archaeology and academia. Look at where we are today, a time of global uncertainty, political strife, social unrest, environmental crises, and a deep spiritual weariness that many can't quite name. People are searching for connection, for meaning, for something real that cuts through the noise. And so when ancient texts resurface, such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, or fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, their words can feel, strangely, as if they were written for the present. These texts often speak of endurance, compassion, and truth in ways that continue to resonate today. What strikes many, whether listening to podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience, reflecting in quiet churches, or engaging on social media, is how different these voices sound from the versions of history people are used to. It seems that the drama with the fiery preaching and spectacular acts of God would have been captivating. More often than not, they are voices that embrace struggle, complexity, and vulnerability. Perhaps that is the reason they feel so resonant right now. Amid an era dominated by certainty, where shouting replaces listening, and where humility can be confused for weakness, ancient text urges us to slow down. It is easy to see why many feel these texts, whichever side of the canonical fault line they fall, speak to our time. Quite often, they reflect individuals grappling with faith, with injustice, with hope, not with a view to building movements, but simply in search of understanding their world. Early Christian writings, such as those found at Nag Hammadi or among the Dead Sea Scrolls, remind us that ancient communities were wrestling with many of the same questions we ourselves are asking today. Certainly, one may be tempted to ponder the timing of a renewal or surfacing of any such text. Is it a coincidence, or does it feel meaningful because of the time we are in? Most historians will warn against forcing meaning into timing. Still, they do recognize how often ancient texts can feel strikingly timely in their address of universal human trials. Scholars have noted that themes of being forced to endure, gentleness, and the need for understanding have been relevant for all times. And when crises of any kind arise, they will always feel freshly relevant. And this may be the legacy of these texts, regardless of their existence or truth. It's about what these texts mean to us today, and not just what they tell us about the past. This is the invitation to listen rather than argue, to contemplate truth as something to carry instead of something to thrust at others, and forgiveness as something to choose, working not because it makes us feel good, but because it makes us human. And so the texts invite back into the present voices from the past. And just when reflection seems enough, the real challenge begins: what this could mean for all of us today. Impact on history and faith. When an ancient artifact emerges from the shadows of time, it doesn't merely reshape our understanding of the past. It shakes the foundations of the present, forcing us to confront the stories we thought were settled and the truths we believed unchanging. If this letter, sealed with fragile wax and hidden for 2 millennia, truly came from Jesus himself, its significance would echo far beyond the halls of academia or the glass cases of museums. It would ripple through history, theology, and the human heart, challenging what we think we know about faith, identity, and our own endless search for meaning. Such a discovery would not be confined to dusty scholarly debates or footnotes in historical tomes. It would reach into the soul of the modern world, making us ask not just how we read the past, but how we live in its shadow today. What we assumed were certainties about Jesus, about divine revelation, about the very nature of truth, would be thrown into new light, compelling us to see both history and ourselves with fresh eyes. Let's go back in time, to a world where Jesus' words were captured not by his own hand, but through the memories and interpretations of those who followed him. The tradition we know was shaped by Gospels written decades after his death, accounts filtered through layers of faith, fear, and hope, preserved in a form designed to endure across generations. But here, if genuine, we would encounter something astonishingly different. Not a voice, refracted through centuries of transmission and translation, but something raw and immediate, a direct, intimate glimpse of the man behind the Messiah. It would force historians to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the formation of early Christianity, the fragility of oral and written traditions, and the perils of preserving truth in a world of political unrest and cultural upheaval. The letter's existence would ignite new searches in forgotten caves, neglected libraries, and ancient ruins, driven by a single haunting question. If one letter survived the long erosion of time, could there be others, waiting in the dark, waiting to be heard? For believers, the implications would cut to the core of faith itself. A letter written by Jesus would offer in equal measure comfort and disquiet. Comfort because it might show us a Jesus more tangible, more human, a man who knew fear, longing, and love, who reached out not with sermons or parables, but with simple words meant for someone he cherished. And yet, such humanity might also unsettle, pulling us away from the familiar and cherished image of the divine figure who spoke in proclamations and riddles, and instead offering the portrait of a man vulnerable enough to write down what spoken words failed to express. It would invite us to reconsider not only what we believe about Jesus, but what we may have overlooked in our haste to reach grand conclusions about him. Suddenly, we might see not only the Messiah, but the brother, the son, the friend, a figure not shrouded in endless layers of interpretation, but reaching across time in the simplest, most human way. Yet the impact would not end with scholars, theologians, or the faithful. It would touch anyone willing to listen. In an age of relentless noise, when ideas are shouted, broadcast, and dissected in real time, the letter would remind us of the quiet strength found in vulnerability and in the gentle act of writing. Its words would not come as thunderous proclamations or easy slogans, but as something smaller, softer, a whisper that calls us to listen differently. The debates would rage, of course. Some would hail it as a miraculous window into history. Others would dismiss it as a forgery, a clever trick, or a relic misunderstood. But in focusing on its origins, we might miss the deeper truth, that its power lies not in proving or disproving anything, but in reminding us to listen, truly listen, to the voices of the past, to faith, and to each other. And perhaps that is its greatest gift, not a new creed to divide us, nor a rewritten Bible to replace what came before, but a call to humility, to remember that the strongest truths are not always found in the loudest voices that command armies or fill stadiums, but in the fragile words of one person writing in the dark, hoping that someone, someday, would understand. And now, across 2,000 years of time, perhaps that letter has finally reached us, asking us not just what we believe, but how we choose to hear. If this left you thinking as much as it did for Joe Rogan, let us know what you believe. Was this the voice of Jesus reaching across time? Or just another mystery daring us to listen? Like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most unsettling discoveries. And don't miss the next video on screen for another truth hidden in plain sight.